The Chidori makes absolutely no sense. Slayer, what do you mean by that? The Chidori is like the coolest thing ever. It's one of the most iconic jutsu of all time. Yes, the Chidori is awesome, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love it. But there is one aspect about the jutsu that has grinded my gears for years at this point, and I just have to talk about it. And that aspect is the jutsu's speed. It is insanely inconsistent, and I cannot stress that enough, y'all. Without further ado, let's get to it. Right, so the Chidori's whole thing is that when you use it, it gives you extreme tunnel vision, and then you kinda zoom forward and you can't really anticipate attacks or react to your opponent's movements. You can't effectively change your trajectory, you're very easy to predict because you're zooming at your opponent in a straight line, and so on. These disadvantages that supposedly stem from the jutsu's extreme speed are the reason why the Sharingan is required to effectively use the Chidori. You see, the Sharingan's dynamic vision, precognition, enhanced reflexes, and all-around visual prowess allow the user of the Chidori to organically bypass all of its weaknesses, making it an incredibly powerful weapon. And I really need to stress that it's been stated time and time again that Sharingan isn't optional for this jutsu to be used effectively, it is mandatory. Like, so much so that when Kakashi lost his Sharingan, he had to invent a whole new jutsu to compensate for his inability to use Lightning Blade anymore. More on the Purple Lightning fiasco later. But all of this is to say that the Chidori's always been portrayed as a move that has speed so extreme it requires a Sharingan to be used safely. Given that fact, I feel like a great percentage of the fandom perceive the Chidori as a massive speed boost. But is it really? Alright. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna list off some of the more glaring inconsistencies about the Chidori's speed that I noticed over the years, and then we'll try to form an educated opinion regarding whether or not it actually is a speed amp, and just how it works, right? I'm sure y'all are wondering, what the hell does the Rasengan have to do with the Chidori being a speed amp? Well, a lot, to be honest. Anyone even vaguely familiar with Naruto knows that Naruto and Sasuke have these Rasengan Chidori clashes like a lot, and I mean a lot. It's just a staple of any Naruto vs Sasuke fight. The issue with it is that the Rasengan isn't really a speed amp, and it was never stated or shown to share the Chidori's weakness of creating tunnel vision or any of that. Another massive giveaway is that the Sharingan isn't really needed to use the jutsu safely. So all of that just begs the question, does it make sense for the Chidori to be this massive speed amp if it's constantly matched by a move that is explicitly not? Like, just Naruto's base speed is apparently enough to match this mega amped Sasuke, which I find odd personally. Just food for thought though, and I'd love to hear y'all's opinions on that. Moving on though. So, this whole Sharingan is absolutely required to use the Chidori safely thing, while heavily emphasized in lore, it's not necessarily wholly consistent in practice. Like, Sasuke actually used the Chidori without having his Sharingan active on more than one occasion, and it didn't really seem to be that big of a deal or anything. And not just that, but Purple Lightning is also a move I find super weird, to be honest. Kakashi apparently created it to replace the Raikiri, since he can no longer use that, but then you look at it closely and in practice, it's just color swap Chidori, man. He uses it in exactly the same way half the time, just a lightning enhanced thrust attack. I know he can also use it as a mid-range option projectile thingy as well, but still, it's kinda whack. You know what's even weirder? This random fucking jobber from Kakashi Retsuden being able to use a jutsu that's pretty much the Chidori in everything but name. No Sharingan, no nothing. I don't know, man, these examples aren't that bad on their own, but when you stack them on top of everything else, it kinda builds up. So, Hidari is kind of a weird case as well because he's another example of the lore not necessarily adding up with what we actually observe. So, he literally says that a Sharingan would make his use of the Chidori more effective, and while I don't doubt that, but at the same time, it's like, he never seemed to really struggle with its use at all before dropping that line. He used it pretty competently in my opinion, so like, eh. So, the body flicker technique is a basic jutsu that allows a ninja to use chakra to enhance their speed. The whole point of this technique is that it makes you move faster than normal. So fast in fact that you often appear as a blur to onlookers, which makes it seem like you've teleported. Now, obviously every single ninja can utilize this jutsu. And a Sharingan isn't exactly a requirement for it, so that gets me thinking, like, if the Chidori is a speed amp so extreme it requires a Sharingan to safely use, then surely it's faster than the body flicker jutsu, right? But is that really consistent? I'm not so sure, but let's keep going. So Kakashi specifically had Sasuke trained to increase his base speed in order to be able to use the Chidori. But why? If the move already offers such an insane speed boost, then why is training to increase Sasuke's speed so important? Is there like a bare minimum speed required to be able to perform this jutsu? That's kinda strange, I can't lie. So this is pretty related to the first point. Outside of the Rasengan stuff, a bunch of other people managed to react to or even outspeed the Chidori before, even though they are not faster than the user's base speed. For example, we had Kakuzu just straight up intercepting a Raikiri from Kakashi who's mid-sprint. Now, Kakuzu is a pretty formidable shinobi and all that, but he wasn't really noticeably faster than Kakashi physically. He wasn't running circles around him or anything. They seemed pretty comparable to me, with Kakuzu having a slight edge maybe. Then we had Pain doing the same thing more than once. And again, yes, Pain is overall superior to Kakashi, I get that, but it's not like he was statuing Kakashi or anything. Speed-wise, they weren't too far apart in my opinion, and I could pull up more examples, but y'all get the idea. The Chidori has been reacted to many times by people comparable to the user, which kinda puts its status as a massive speed amp under question in my opinion. I think by this point I've managed to paint a pretty compelling picture for why the Chidori being this insane speed amp is at the very least questionable, but some of you may not even know. Well, there are actually a fair few reasons for this, and we'll go over them briefly now. I mean, this is by far the biggest reason in my opinion. The Chidori's lore from the moment it was first introduced emphasized its speed. You had guys spewing lines such as "the secret is in the speed of the thrust" and describing the Chidori as having almost impossible speed. Then there's obviously the very famous Kakashi lore of him cutting a lightning bolt in half using the technique, hence it being called the lightning cutter and so on. Everything about the jutsu emphasizes speed, but why else would its biggest weakness be that it makes you move too fast? To be able to see your opponent's counters and react to them due to getting tunnel vision and all that. The data book also described it as a high-speed stab, so yeah, I just can't really blame anyone for thinking that Chidori is a massive speed boost. The lore clearly supports that notion quite heavily, I would say. Yeah, I know, I listed a bunch of anti-feats and inconsistencies earlier, but make no mistake, the Chidori does have some good feats that support it being a speed amp. A few examples come to mind for me. We had Sasuke being able to match and even outspeed transformed Gaara with the Chidori, who was so fast that Sasuke could barely track him with the Sharingan and barely managed to evade his attacks. So this is actually a pretty decent example of the Chidori offering a respectable speed boost. Another example, I think, is Sasuke blitzing Naruto's clones in their second fight. But it's very interesting to note that in their first fight, Sasuke literally needed a distraction in order to be able to hit Naruto with the Chidori cleanly. So it's fair to say that it's way more consistent for the Chidori not being a speed amp in Naruto vs Sasuke fights, to be honest. But I digress. Another decent showing for the Chidori is Sarada blitzing the shit out of Boro. Honestly, this might be the single best showing for the Chidori being a speed amp, but yeah, I'm sure I forgot some feats here and there, but I think I made my point. There's definitely a fair amount of examples on both sides, so it's definitely not clear-cut in my opinion. There is an important point I haven't brought up yet. So a lot of people have this idea that the Chidori is only a massive speed amp when you have a lot of room to run up and build your speed. This concept is supported by how the databook described the jutsu and how Kakashi and Sasuke both used it for the first time, respectively. They had a lot of running room and kinda built up momentum that way. It's a fine idea in theory in my opinion, but I don't think it's flawless or anything, to be honest. Like a lot of the anti-feats I mentioned prior had the characters running at full speed, and again, this brings us back to the body flicker point because no matter how fast they get by running up for a distance first, it still shouldn't be faster than their speed while using Shunshin. Additionally, the fact that Kakashi just stopped using the move altogether makes this very weird. Why? Well, because if the only issue was building up speed by running over a long distance, then why didn't he just simply not do that? And also, why is his new jutsu being used the exact same way as the Chidori half the time anyway? Man, this is such a mess, bro. My head hurts. It's so weird. So things are still a bit murky and inconsistent even with this idea in mind, although I don't entirely disagree with it or anything. I even think it might be useful in figuring out what the lore intends for the Chidori to be, which in my opinion is just a thrust/stab attack performed at a shinobi's top speed. With all of this being said, what have we learned today, gentlemen? Well, the Chidori's speed is incredibly fucking inconsistent, that's what. Like, the lore and feats simply do not add up to form a cohesive whole in my opinion, it's just genuinely not consistent, and trust me, I do not say that lightly. I hate just labeling something as an inconsistency, it feels like a cop-out, and I usually don't give up that easily, but I've thought about this a lot, and I don't see another logical conclusion. Like, I think the lore and a handful of feats do heavily support the notion that the Chidori enhances speed, to some extent, but then we have so many other showings and logical inconsistencies that paint a different picture, and short of just ignoring one side completely out of bias, I don't see how both sides can be reconciled or coexist. I believe a nuanced outlook is appropriate in this case. What I mean by that is that we simply have to accept that sometimes the Chidori will be portrayed as having godly speed, and other times it'll just be lightning-coated Rasengan. It is what it is, man. But yeah, if y'all have other thoughts on this topic, I'd love to hear them. I actually really want to stir up a dialogue on this subject because it has bothered me for the longest time. So even if you disagree with me or think I'm dumb or have anything to add that I may have missed, please feel free to share your thoughts, and that's about it from me. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more from me, please like and subscribe as that helps out a ton. I'll see you guys next time.
Bye bye!